Woohoo! Hey there guys, welcome back, Ricky here. Alright, so today I wanted to do a really quick test on a few things, that questions that I actually had in mind about stropping. And as you guys may recall, I had my Akazawa, my essentially no-name Japanese knife that achieved over 1,000 cuts on the rope cut test. This here is heat treated to a 64 to a 65, and by the end of the test, the bottom 1/3 of this knife had no edge left. It literally was not able to cut anything, no paper, nothing. And so I wanted to take this opportunity to kind of see how far I can take stropping and how versatile stropping really is. And so I basically wanted to put together a really quick stropping session of the Herald's Grain compound. Now I have told you guys that I have been stropping a lot more lately just because I don't have a lot of time to sharpen knives in my home. So I do keep a strop underneath my sink with the Heralds. And normally my knives are about 3 to 4 days, old before I strop them. So this is the first time I'm actually stropping a knife that has been, abused the way this knife is. Now after 1,000 cuts on the rope, that is like using this knife for many months or so. And so the edge of this knife was actually very, very dull. So I really wanted to see if the knife's edge can be brought back to life with just a strop. And this strop here is rated around 6,000 to 8,000 grit, so fairly high. And a lot of you guys actually ask me questions like, if I have no whetstones, can I sharpen my knives? I also get questions like, can I strop my knives only and never have to sharpen them? So I had to make a new strop. I grabbed one of my carbon fiber plates, threw some legs on it, and the hide that I'm using is the rolled buffalo. Now the rolled buffalo is really nice because it's actually very dense and the surface doesn't absorb any of the compounds. Now when using this hide next to a latigo, the latigo will absorb much more of the compound versus the rolled buffalo, which will absorb none of it. Now I tried really quick making my own compound with the NK block. It's a 1 pound block. I basically heated it up with a heat gun and threw some mineral oil together with it, and it didn't quite work. I was very excited for it to work, but it didn't really work. I'm probably rushing it right now and I'm not doing it properly, but I have used NK on my other stropping blocks and they work really well. So there's something I'm doing with oil or the heating here that's actually messing it up, so I'll have to figure it all out again. I scraped all of my gunky DIY stuff off and applied some nice Herald's Green compound. Now this here is actually, again, rated from 6,000 to 8,000 grit. Not exactly sure exactly where it is, but it's around 6,000 to 8,000 grit and is actually very easy to apply. Anyways, after my compound was properly loaded and everything's cleaned off, I put the knife to a really quick cut test. As you can see, the knife's edge at the top half of the knife is actually very clean, razor sharp as it was out of the box. This is the edge that you want when you buy a knife. The bottom half, however, does not work at all. You can see here that it will not cut anything. So the bottom half of the cutting edge was completely dull. It can't cut anything, it won't even split paper, so it was time to hop on the strop. Now I started with a counting down method. Basically I did about 8 to 10 strokes on each side, and then I just started counting down, reducing it by 2 strokes every single time I turned the knife. And then when I got to 1, I simply went back and forth for a good 10 or 15 times on each side. That gave my knife a fairly clean edge. Now a quick tip, you probably should wait for the compound to dry a little bit before you actually used it. Mine was completely wet, and so a lot of the compound was actually sticking onto the blade itself, which wasn't really a big problem, I don't think, but it was just kind of messy to use. And then I did a really quick cut test, and surprisingly the edge was actually like 90% back to life. It was cutting really well. There wasn't any major skips. The only thing I felt was that it had a little bit more friction relative to the front half of the blade. So I decided to pull out the other stropping block that I've made with a Herald's Red compound. Now this compound here is rated up to about 9,000 grit, give or take a few hundred, maybe even 1,000. And it was actually made a few weeks ago, so it's actually nice and dry, so there's not any issues with it. I just went to work with the stropping. Now instead of going to a counting down method again and kind of starting the stropping process all over, I simply did single strokes on each side. I went for about 15 to 20 strokes on each side just to make sure that I have a really nice clean edge. And also keep in mind, I'm applying no pressure at this point. I'm really just letting the knife do the work. I'm not trying to press the edge into the leather at all. The rolled buffalo that I'm using is very, very flat and very dense. And so the edge that I'm actually getting on my knives is expected to have a very nice V-shaped, a very sharp V-shaped formation. And so I wasn't worried about the knife actually not getting enough pressure on the strop. Once that was done, I simply cleaned off my knife and did a really quick cut test. And surprisingly, the edge on the bottom half of the knife was extremely clean, probably just as clean as the edge at the top half of the knife. And that was something I was very surprised and very happy to see. One, it saved me a lot of time from actually hopping onto the stone and doing a full sharpening session from 1,000 grit to 6,000 grit to 8,000 grit or something of that sort. And also, it actually tells me that if you strop properly with a really good leather, you actually can bring a knife back to edge or back to life fairly easily without a whetstone. Now, that's not to say that you shouldn't have a whetstone. You definitely should have a 1000 grit or a sharpening whetstone in your arsenal for, upkeep and for long-term upkeep. But for situations where you have a knife even as high as this knife here, which is heat treated to a 65, it can still be brought back to life on a strop, which is great, which is actually something I did not expect. I was expecting that, the hardest knife I've used with this stropping compound in my home is I want to say the Dalstrong and the Kramer, which is heat treated to a 61. And then I haven't stropped any of the Dragon knives yet, but definitely the Dalstrong, which is heat treated to a 62. And so that strop, this strop here has been treating that knife fairly well. So I didn't expect the same results on a 65 Rockwell knife. I was guessing it was going to take either a lot longer or the knife would just be too hard to actually strop. But surprisingly, these stropping compounds are effective enough to actually strop knives up to a 65 Rockwell, which to me is awesome, because now, even if I take this knife into my home and I use it for a month at a time, I don't have to spend 15-20 minutes to actually sharpen the knife and then polish it. I can go on the strop for 2 to 3 minutes and then hop on the red for another minute, and I'm done. And for someone like myself who don't have the time to sharpen knives anymore, at least not my own personal knives, having a strop that I know can actually take care of the job is awesome. So this here is the Herald's Green and the Herald's Red. They go by like 3 different names, so I'll find the exact item for you and list them in the video description. Over the next 2 or 3 months, you're going to see a lot of videos with me doing compound stropping, and knives that I normally would sharpen, I'm actually going to throw onto the strop, and I'm going to do a side-by-side comparison with strops and whetstones and see if I can actually see a difference between a really high quality whetstone and a really high quality stropping compound. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. Now this is actually using, again, a 6,000 to 8,000 grit strop. Is anybody out there actually using a lower grit strop to actually sharpen your knives with? If you do, let me know what you use. Let me know what your experiences are, because I really want to test them out. I don't have many stropping compounds that are in that lower range. Most of my compounds are like 6,000 and above. I admit all the time I am a novice when it comes to knives and knife sharpening, and I'm always learning, constantly learning. And I really appreciate your feedback on everything. Now, for those who are wondering, every 4 to 5 sessions, I actually just add a little dab of mineral oil to move the compounds around, and that actually lifts new compounds to the surface and will kind of bury some of the load up that you guys don't normally get from the knife letting go of materials. And so it actually helps keep the compound a lot cleaner at the surface level, and will make your compounds with the strop last a lot longer as well. Doing it that way, you can probably have a strop without having to reload with new compound for at least, I would say, maybe a dozen uses or so. So just a really quick tip for you. So I actually have 4 of these blocks. I have 2 here in the studio and I have 2 in my home under my sink. And so I'm actually going to sell them because I'm actually making some new blocks, testing some new compounds. So if you guys want these blocks, I'll leave a link in the video description. You guys can go straight to my Etsy store and pick them up. First come, first serve. Thank you for watching. Please remember to subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next video.